Record to the cloud. Steve Allen once said that comedy equals tragedy plus time. And I've often wondered, how do you shorten that gap between the tragedy and the comedy? How do you turn the story around from woe is me to woohoo? What are your thoughts, Yael?
I love that. I love that metaphor, first of all, because um, if I think about some of my greatest lessons, life lessons, started out when they first happened. They started out at the time, I would have considered them an absolute tragedy.
Hmm.
And now when I look back, um, having gained a whole different perspective on my life and just how things work, now when I look back, yeah, it's definitely a comedy.
Nice. So, what is a specific example of what you're talking about?
um, well, honestly, I can't think of one particular. I wouldn't be able to narrow it down as one particular example.
Okay.
But I would say, you've heard me say before that I was so dramatic. I was such a drama queen in my own head. Everything was such a big deal. Everything was
So,
like, oh my god, poor me, and this one screwed me over, and that one, I can't do anything because I got to wait for this one, and everything was just such a big deal, and such a I was just like I felt like everyone else had control over what happened in my life. Nothing was my fault. Nothing was my fault, because you can't blame me because I got to wait for this one to do that, or I got to wait for that one to do this, or
so let's get. Can you tell
okay.
me about one time who was someone that you felt had control of your life? That
Well, I could say my dad. I could say significant others.
okay. Well, let's start with
Um,
your dad since we've talked about.
okay. All right. Well, yeah, you and my dad go way back at this point. I feel like you know him at this point.
Although I don't even know his name, so let's start
Oh,
there.
well, his name was Moshe.
Moshe. Okay.
Yes, which is the Hebrew name for Moses.
Okay.
Um,
And what?
I don't remember what year it was, but he did eventually become a citizen, and then he took on the name Michael, but nobody ever called him that.
Really? So
Yeah,
from Moshe to Michael.
yeah.
Interesting.
And I think that was just because he wanted something more American. Kind of like when I used Lynn. I
Mm,
think he maybe actually I never thought about it. Maybe that was his, like, kind of him following my example. Like he just wanted something more American, less, foreign sounding.
okay. Interesting. So he goes from Moshe to Michael. You went
Mhm.
from Yael to Lynn,
Mhm.
and it sounds like you actually went from Yael to Lynn first.
Mhm. I did.
So how old were you when you went from
Oh,
Yael
I
to
never thought
Lynn?
about it until just now as we're talking about it. I was 10.
You were 10?
I was 10 when I started using Lynn. I was 10. Yeah.
Wow.
Um yeah, I started early.
Well, that's
on
interesting.
this on this journey. I started early on this journey.
So why tell me, do
Um
you remember what
and my
inspired you to go from Yael to Lynn? Was there a specific instance? Did someone make fun of your name or
yes. It wasn't it wasn't one particular instance. It was, yes, everybody made fun of my name. The kids at school. Like I think I told you I was not a popular kid. I was always very I was always very self-conscious. I was the way I always said it is I was one of those, you're ugly and your mama dresses you funny. I was one of those kids.
and you got a funny name too.
And I had a funny name on top of it. So they had all kinds of ammo to make fun of me on stuff.
Oh
So
my.
I looking back, I didn't make the conscious decision at the time, but looking back, I guess I was giving them one less piece of ammo to fire at me because every time someone would mispronounce my name, I would
Well, what?
think they were making fun of me.
How would they pronounce it?
Oh, I get Yale, y'all.
Y'all,
Uh, I
especially
get
here in the
y'all a
South,
lot.
it's like,
Yeah,
are you
I get
are you using my name? Or are you just saying y'all?
yeah. um, and I get well, Yale is the most common, and then I get Yael,
Yeah, yell.
Yael. Um, if I spell it for someone, even like if I'm, on the phone with someone and they're filling out a form, they say, "Can you spell it?" I say, "It's Yael, Yael." And when they spell it back, they say L. What? No, it didn't start with an L. So even when I spell it, they can't get it right.
So
So
there was a
now
time.
it's a comedy. Back then, in my head, it was a tragedy because back then, I thought every time someone was mispronouncing it, I thought they were making fun of me about it.
Got it. Yep.
So, but now I look at this conversation. Now it's hilarious. I kind of like seeing how creative someone can get with, okay, how are they going to butcher it?
Nice.
And it's a pleasant surprise when they don't. I usually say, if someone pronounces it correctly, I often thank them.
Mm, of course. Well, that's really interesting because I've had troubled relationships with my name too. And it's not so much with Steve, although my challenge with Steve is that it's when my mother named me Steve in 1967, she named me that because she thought it was an unusual name.
Mm-hmm. Not so much. Okay.
The the problem is that apparently millions of other mothers thought the same thing. Because if you actually go back in the baby name registries, like if you go to the Social Security name database,
Mm-hmm.
a couple of like when mom grew up, Steve wasn't a common name. So
Oh,
back in the 30s, but by the time I was born, had become a common name.
right.
So I have always been troubled by, there's always two or three or more Steves in the room, and it's like, can we just? And so it's like, okay, are you going to be Steve G? Are you going to be Steven? Are you going to spell it this way with a V? Are you going to spell it with a PH or whatever? And it was just like, this kind of frustration around how do we differentiate
Right.
from one another.
Yeah, we have lots of Pats here. We have like 6 Pats here.
Six Pats,
Yeah.
interesting.
And that doesn't even count my personal. I know 3 Patties outside of here. So,
And the
lots of Patricia.
challenge to complicate things even more, Pat is can be either a man or a woman
Right. That's true. It's Patrick or Pat or
or
Patricia.
Patricia, right?
Yeah.
So interesting. So there was a time when you felt that your name was a tragedy and you
Mhm.
did away with it, so to speak, by
Yep.
going by Lynn, which is not even your middle name.
No, it was literally a name I picked out of thin air. Literally. I was walking around and I was thinking, and I don't know why I remember the thinking process of this. I wanted a name that was easy to pronounce, that people can't screw it up when they're trying to read it, and it's easy to spell. Um, I would have liked a name that started with Y, but Y is a difficult letter. And I don't think I look like a Yolanda. And at the time, that was the only name I could think of that starts with a Y. So, um, so I ended up with Lynn. Actually, a friend of mine, we're walking to school one day and she said, "You look like a Lynn." I said, "Okay, call me Lynn."
So that was
And
the
then
inspiration
that
for
it
it.
has a Y in it, it has an L in it. So it's a little bit related to Yael. And it's easy and you can't screw it up. And then eventually, years on down the road, I would say it's Lynn, 2 N's, no E, no duh. So that's how
Oh,
you
oh,
spell
no,
it.
duh. Okay,
Right,
like
as in
Linda.
Linda. Right.
Okay,
It's not Linda.
no,
Two
duh.
N's, no E, no duh. So that's how you spell Lynn.
Okay.
So,
So we go from Yael to Lynn, no
mhm,
duh.
right.
And did that was that a simple transition? Did that solve all the awkwardness and the feeling?
At the time, I don't remember. I'm making assumptions here based on, what I do remember. At the time, I didn't have a lot of friends. It's not like I had a lot of people who would call my name, who would, refer to my name or anything. I never changed it legally, so some of the teachers humored me with it. But for the most part in class, during taking attendance, they would still say Yale, um, or Yael or whatever they said. But a few of the teachers did humor me with it. Um, but I didn't have a lot of friends that I had to, take into consideration. My family, I don't think my family ever called me Lynn. Later on, they eventually, when I started making friends, they knew who people meant when they were saying Lynn, but that my family always called me Yael. Um, so as far as the transition goes from being Yael to becoming Lynn, it seemed more simple. Now, a few years ago when I went back to using Yael, it was a whole process. I had because now I've had all these people that I've made connections with over the last, 35 years, because that's how long I went by Lynn, 35 years.
Wow.
I was 45 when I went back to Yael. Um, and by now, I've got literally over 1,000 Facebook friends. So there's that. Um, Even my family had finally started calling me Lynn. So now they had to get used to going back to Yael, or, hearing me use the name Yael. Um, I have people who I've met over the last 35 years who didn't even know there was such a thing as, Yael, because they've always known me as Lynn.
Mm.
So it was a huge deal when I went back to using Yael. And
So
I
I'm
made a big deal out of
curious,
it.
did Ken know you as Lynn or as
Oh,
Yael?
he knew me as Lynn. He knew me as Lynn, but because we dated, and like I said, I never made it legal. So he knew Yael. He knew that Yael was my real name. But he always called me Lynn. He always, and actually it's funny because back then he went by, I don't remember where. Oh, he went by Kenwood back then.
Kenwood. Really?
Kenwood. Everybody knew him as Kenwood. I called him
And
Kenny.
is
I
that
called
his
him
name?
Kenny. No, his name is Kenneth. Kenneth uh, Kenneth Wayne Johnson is his
Okay.
name. But
Where did
back
Kenwood
then,
come from?
turns out it came from Blues Brothers from Elwood.
Okay.
I don't know. It was
And
a
he just
bunch of
kind of
buddies.
played with it. And
Yeah, a bunch of buddies just started calling him, referring to him as Kenwood instead of Elwood. Um. Anyway, so everybody called him Kenwood, and I was Lynn at the time. So, just a little twist here. We now work at a place called Linwood Estates. 35 years later, being married, we now work at Linwood Estates.
and it's Ken and
It's Kenwood. Well, it was Kenwood and Lynn at the
right.
time.
And
So,
now
like
you're
Brangelina,
yes, right.
So
Yes.
there's Linwood. So, but now we are Ken and Yael.
Yes.
But
Right.
just the irony of it, I just thought
So
that
I
was
find
funny.
that
Adding
really
more to the comedy.
interesting
Okay.
how our relationship with our names change. There
Hmm.
was a time, a very long time, until honestly just a couple months ago, when any time one would call me Steven, I would
Mhm.
just, the hairs on the back of my neck would stand up.
Mhm.
And I'm just like, don't call me that. And I was really insistent on it. And I took on, I was had just read the book The Alter Ego by Todd Herman, which talks about various people, including uh, Bo Jackson and Beyonce and so forth, taking on these alter egos in order to kind of have a stage name that they could step into.
Right.
And I don't remember. I was looking for a name that met certain criteria, and the name that came up was Steven. And I'm like, okay, that's just weird. Because the name that I've been resisting all
Right.
along is the name that shows up as
Interesting, isn't it?
the one that reflects the characteristics that I was looking for in creating this alter ego, right?
Mhm.
And I went, not only did I come up with Steven, which really didn't take much effort since my name really is Steven.
Right. Yeah.
I also was playing around with the last name, and I'm like, okay, uh, wordsmith, and it is now my alter ego, which means kind of the person that I step into when I'm facing, I don't know, something that I need to
Right. When you're saying, "I am
need to put on
Steven."
my cape.
I am Steven, damn it. When you're
Yes,
at that moment?
yes, that moment when I step into the phone booth and put on my cape and
Right.
lose the glasses and so forth.
Mhm.
Yes, so it's Stephen J. Wordsworth.
Oh, that's cute. That's cool. I like it.
And now when I write down my affirmations in the morning, I
Mhm.
oftentimes will put down Stephen whatever. Stephen is determined and dedicated. Stephen is whatever.
Mhm.
Uh, and the relationship that I have now with Stephen is so different from what it was previously. But it took me, gosh, I began insisting people call me Steve when I was in my early 20s. So it was
Mhm.
roughly 30 years that I had this
Oh, you had that was your Lynn.
disparity.
That was your Lynn. It wasn't
Yes,
it wasn't quite as like an extreme difference like mine, but that was your Lynn. It was just your
right.
that's who you identified with. So, I have my ex-husband, my kid's dad. His name is John, and he used to get the same reaction when someone would call him Jonathan
Mm,
because his name wasn't Jonathan. It was just John, John.
mm.
And um we don't talk anymore. We haven't talked in a few years now. But I have found it ironic that the last kid he had, um, I think I don't know, he's probably not even 10 years old yet, but his name is Jonathan.
Mm.
He named his kid Jonathan, the
Interesting.
name that he absolutely could not stand. He also always told me he didn't believe in juniors. He never wanted to do a junior.
Interesting.
So, like I said, we haven't talked in years, but I would love to find out his story about that
Huh. That's interesting.
as far as why how he ended up landing on the name Jonathan, because I know that he used to get that same reaction if somebody would call him Jonathan, and he hated that name. So, I'd
Interesting.
love to it's one of those things where I would love to, if we ever get to have a conversation again,
Right.
if it happens, that would definitely be a conversation to hit.
That's interesting.
So,
So,
going back to the whole turning tragedy into comedy, I do want to. We could fall into a rabbit hole on this forever. I
oh,
think
for sure.
on the
Yes.
whole name game thing, but I do want to stay on the topic of turning tragedy into comedy.
Yes,
So,
please.
what do you think turns it around? What turns it from a tragedy? At what point is it no longer a tragedy, and at what point can you call it a comedy?
That's a really good question. the thought that, especially with regards to the name and with my name, is two things really. And this is where I wanted to really dive into your perspective and my perspective. Part of me wanted, the first answer that came to mind was being able to laugh at the kind of the comedy of the situation,
Mhm.
right? You know, that I
Yeah.
resisted Steven for all these years and now I'm don't have a problem with it.
Mhm.
And similarly with, Lynn and Yael. But I also have to recognize that the first thing that happened was just accepting that situation was there. That, this resistance that I had to Steven, and I don't know exactly why I had so much resistance to it. Part of it's just that it's so formal and it sounds, so buttoned up and, I'm
It's
Steven,
very yeah.
which
It
is
is very
not
formal.
which is not what I the persona that I want to project generally. But the name that actually came up when I did that search was actually Steven Spielberg, who
Oh.
I do not think of as, being buttoned up. And I mean, he's very professional and he's
Mhm.
incredibly talented in what he does. And so I had to change my relationship, or just I had to accept one, that there was a difference between the way that I was feeling about the name and the way that I could feel about the name, right?
Mhm.
That it that the way that I was feeling didn't have to be a pejorative, a negative connotation with the name, that I could accept
Mhm.
it as being potentially a positive. And when I got to that point of just accepting things, that opened up space for me to step into a new relationship with that, right?
Mhm.
And that reminds me of my transition with my struggle with depression and particularly with suicide. When I stopped fighting it, when I just accepted that I had those emotions, I had those thoughts, those uh, urges, if you will, I was able to, and it didn't just like, in a way, it happened just like that. So the gap between, tragedy and comedy was like almost instantaneous, but it didn't, that
Right.
instant change didn't change in an
That
instant.
instant change took years to get to.
Yes. But I have noticed how much bringing comedy into the situation helps, right?
Mhm.
That if we can just play with something, just play with, like, taking on an alter ego is a playful way of approaching life.
Mhm.
Instead of saying, well, I'm Steve and, this is who I am, and, don't deviate from that.
Right.
Kind of going back to when we were kids, and okay, let's play cowboys and Indians, which is what we called it then. Um, um, I always wanted to be the Native American person because I had so much respect for the culture and the people, and read
Okay.
everything I could on the subject and so forth. But just allowing ourselves to take on a different persona, right? To play with it and to look at things differently. And I think that's one of the things that comedy lends itself to, is looking at life through a different lens, right? It's not just taking the same old lens, because there is no comedy to the same old, right?
Right.
That there's something comical, something different about our relationship, whether that be our names or whether that be
Right.
our struggle with depression, or whether that be, and that one took even longer because I first accepted my struggle. And there was only like in the last 6 months when I started to, when I was in a humorous speech contest and I spoke about suicide in a humorous speech contest, that I really began to see the humor
Did you
in
get
the
I'd love to
struggle.
hear the reactions you got. Did you get any resistance back from people?
Oh, I got lots of resistance back. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry I missed that. That would have been awesome to listen to or to watch.
Yeah.
I enjoy seeing people's reactions. I love watching interactions between people. Um, so I decided I started considering going back to Yael many years before I did. Well, actually, I started using Yael once in a while. I wasn't as resistant to it long before I started using it again, before I, more officially changed my name back.
Mm.
Um, I stopped keeping it a secret. I started to tell people, if someone saw it on their caller ID, then I would say, "Oh, that's my real name." Well, then they'd say, "Why do you use Lynn?" I'd say, "Oh, it's just easier." So, okay. Well, at one point, I had to go to the bank. I received I very nicely, um, I was very fortunate to receive a small inheritance from my great aunt who had passed away at 100 years old, by the way.
Wow.
Um, so the check wasn't huge, but it was big enough for the bank to make a big deal out of it that whatever. But anyway, she didn't know that I never legally changed it. She had told her attorneys the checks were made out to Lynn Ellsworth. So
Mm.
when I went to deposit the check, um, I signed it and the bank didn't want to accept it because they're like, "Who the hell is Lynn?" Like I said,
Mm.
Yael on paper, or Lynn on paper never really existed because I never changed it legally. So the bank had no idea who Lynn was. Nobody else had any idea, or my great aunt's lawyer didn't know who Yael was. So how do we fix that? So that I can cash this check. So I had to find a notary. I had to get a piece of paper notarized. And of course, I don't have, in order to get something notarized, you got to show your driver's license to prove who you are. But I have nothing in writing saying that I'm Lynn
Mm.
because my name is not legally changed. So luckily, I had a friend who was a notary and he went ahead and notarized it for me. So I would, so that was, that remedied that particular situation. But that's when I started thinking about why do I use Lynn in the first place?
Mm.
It used to be because it made things easier. Now, not so much. It's not making things easier anymore. So, and like I said, I'd stopped resisting the name Yael. And then I found out that what it means, and it means in the biblical translation is strength of God.
Mm.
And given the journey that I've been on, that I am on, I'm not a religious person by any means, but that just felt really strong, very powerful, and I do consider myself sort of a messenger,
Mm.
a messenger, a teacher in that sense.
Sure.
And it just seemed more fitting. So then that's when I decided, to go back to Yael, and then I stopped. I made a big deal about it. I put it on Facebook. I wrote an article about it. I made, I just, I had to do it within myself to officially like denounce Lynn, and Yael made a grand entrance, is what I felt like. So I think for me, turning it into the comedy is um, the point for me was just when I realized my own power in the whole story. Like, when I started realizing why I changed it in the first place, I changed it in the first place to make other people more comfortable.
Mm.
So I felt uncomfortable because I thought that other people didn't like it. That's why I started using Lynn in the first place. So it was the whole thing, it was all in my head. So I feel like what turned it around for me is when I owned why I did it in the first place.
Mm.
I owned the power in that story. That's my story.
Yes.
Nobody else can have that story.
Absolutely. Yes.
So, and as far as, if people were to ask me, if I were still going by Lynn and people asked me, why do you go by Lynn? Then every time I would say, it's just easier, I would be referring to everybody else. It's easier for everybody else. It's not easier for me. So I'm giving everybody else the power in that story.
Mm,
That's my story. So I'm taking back the power. So to make my life easier, I went back to Yael.
nice.
So, and now it's a comedy just to, watching people transition back to from using Lynn, now using Yael. And now we're back to the whole thing about, when people are mispronouncing it and stuff like that. All kinds of reasons to laugh about it. And it feels good now. So for me, I think that's the difference is when you can own the reason that when you can own your story.
Okay.
So for myself, what do you think? How does that sit with you?
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. It's one of the central tenets, I guess, of the way I run my life is recognizing that I'm both the author and the editor of my life, right?
Mhm.
That,
Exactly.
and when I take that pen in hand, and for me, writing is very much a cathartic, a healing, a transformational process.
It's something you cherish.
Right. And
Mhm.
almost every time I write, there's some kind of change, minor or major, that happens in just through the process of writing.
Oh, me too.
And when we take that pen in our hand, so to speak, I actually use a keyboard most of the time. But when take that proverbial pen in hand, then we can change the relationship with the characters in the story, even if those characters in the story are ourselves, or
Mhm.
or our names, or whatever it be. But we can change the relationship. We can create a new story arc for
Right.
the way the story plays out. So owning
So
owning that story,
let's
owning the pen.
let's find another example. Oh. Mhm.
Owning the
What did you
pen.
say? Owning the pen?
Yeah, owning the
Uh-huh.
pen,
I
you know
like that metaphor.
gives us the opportunity to write something new on the page, right? To change the relationship, to instead of writing Lynn or Steve, write Yael or Stephen. You know
Right.
that we get to choose what we're putting down there, right?
Yeah.
And uh, I think at the pinnacle of uh, the this story, that uh, it really, in order to shorten condense the gap between the tragedy and the comedy,
Mhm.
is a couple of things. First of all, recognizing that you own the pen.
Mhm.
Secondly, owning the situation. Why am I choosing to go by this name? What is my
Right.
resistance that I have to a different name? What is the resistance that I have to the way people are responding or are using my name? um, and when
Mhm.
we can just accept kind of where we are, then we can make a choice as to how we want to proceed from there. It's when we just
Yeah.
keep on keep the story that we've been telling for some time going, just because that's what we're used to. Keep the tragedy going because that's the way
Right.
we've been telling the story all along, instead of saying, okay, well, you know what, maybe this isn't such a tragedy, maybe this is actually a comedy. you know which is literally what I did with, when I spoke about suicide in a humorous speech contest, was saying, you know, this looks like a tragedy. Is there another way to look at it
Mhm.
more as a comedy? And one of the things that I did in order to help with that was actually watch a bunch of videos on YouTube of like Richard Pryor dealing with, drug abuse, or Robin Williams doing the same thing, or Elizabeth Banks doing a promotional video for, I think, the American Heart Association, where she's lying on the floor having a heart attack, and she's just hilarious. Taking these really serious subjects and making,
Right.
finding the humor in it. There's
Mhm.
nothing, we get so locked into suicide is this, heart attacks is this,
Mhm.
drug abuse is this, and that's the only way we can look at it. And when someone actually breaks that code and says, let's look at it from a different angle, let's find the comedy in it. There's almost something irreverent about that, or even sacrilegious about it, but yet at the same time, it helps us to change the relationship with what they're talking about.
Can I throw in a topic that, we're not supposed to discuss?
Are you going to discuss the unspeakable?
I am. Sex is another thing. So, um, I think I, I like being playful. I love, and Ken says that's one of the things he loves about me is that I'm very playful and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it occurred to me the other day. I don't remember what I did. Something cutesy. I have no idea what I did. Um, and it occurred to me the other day. I thanked him for not taking life too seriously
Mm,
because whatever it was. I could picture past relationships, people that I've been with in the past who would have been, who would have said something to the effect of, you know, oh, you're laughing at me. Why, I was trying to be serious. I was trying to be all romantic and sexy and stuff like that. But now you're laughing at me, you know, and I could just see the situation. And I have probably been in the situation. I've probably been that person who was trying to be all sexy and serious and, all that kind of stuff. And then if the other person would laugh, then I'd get all self-conscious and go running out of the room, thinking, oh, they're just making fun of me.
mm,
So, but now I don't even remember what I did. I have no idea. It was just something silly. Um, but it was nice that we were just being silly together. It
nice.
was, at one point it could have been a tragedy where I could have been scarred for life and never, whatever it was that I did, I would never do it again because
Right.
because whoever I'm with is just going to make fun of me. They're just going to think I'm stupid. They're just going to think I'm, you know, just this silly little girl or whatever. At one point, I would have gone that route,
Mm,
if someone would have, laughed during an intimate moment.
right.
Um, Whereas now, I'm just being playful. We're playing. We're supposed to be having fun. That's the whole point of
Yes.
what we're doing. We're supposed to be merging energies and just having fun, just enjoying each other. That's
Right.
the whole point of the act itself.
Yes.
So anyway,
And when
so
you're like, when you're, I don't remember exactly the etymology of intimate, but it's basically that you are revealing the most innermost part of yourself,
hmm
right?
exactly.
And if that innermost part of yourself is, playful, or,
hmm
funny, or
Right,
whatever, not being able to express that part of yourself, honestly, is the opposite of intimacy.
right, right. All you're doing is you're putting walls up.
Right. And so it's, you know, so part of the challenge of shortening the gap between the tragedy and the comedy is, you know, allowing ourselves to show up as who we are, rather than
Right.
trying to continue a facade that we've been maintaining, either through the way that we behave, or
hmm
the way that the names we're using, or, how we refer to ourselves, or whatever.
Right.
But when we allow ourselves to just show up as who we are, I think that helps us close that gap between the tragedy and the comedy,
Yes.
whether that be laughter or tears, or whatever.
I think the bottom line is people just need to lighten up. I think that's the bottom line. Is
Yeah.
just lighten up on yourself,
Yes. Accept
because
yourself
we're
who you
so
are.
hard on ourselves. We expect so much of ourselves.
And we've got to reach this certain pinnacle,
Mhm.
and, if we're not reaching that, then there's
Right.
something wrong.
Right. So when you're in the midst of a tragedy, of what seems like a tragedy, take a minute to recognize, and this is for our audience. This is not telling you anything you don't already know. Um so when you're in the midst of what feels like a tragedy, take a minute to think about, what are you taking too seriously? What is there in your life, in this moment, that you could possibly just lighten up about? Like, is this little thing, is this gonna matter in a few years, a few months, maybe even a few days, maybe even a few minutes? Are you really
Mm,
gonna care? Are you gonna make this, like, is this bad mood gonna last all day? Or can you just, you know, how quickly can you get over it?
yes.
Is the
You know,
bottom line.
and just like in both of our cases with our names and so forth,
Mhm.
you know, going from tragedy to comedy, you know, isn't just doesn't have to be just one big step. It can be,
Mhm.
but it can also just
Right.
be, can we just stop and pause and be present in this moment?
Mhm.
Am I mad? Am I sad? Am I glad? Am I, whatever? And just accepting where we are right now, and allowing ourselves to be the way that we are right now. By just accepting where we are right now,
Mhm.
it's been shown that if you can just accept whatever emotion you're feeling right now for 90 seconds and just really feel that, hold it, that emotion will release its grip on you, and you'll be able
Right.
to move into, you know, so maybe there's an intermediary step between the tragedy and the comedy, and it's just kind of,
Yeah, that moment of reflection.
yeah,
I
of acceptance.
I like to use dissipate. I feel like it dissipates, where it won't just, like, go away in an instant. It it it's a matter of, it just kind of fades.
Mm, yes.
But does it have to take 20 years for it to fade? Does it have to take a year for it to fade? You know, and it's not going to, depending on what it is, depending on what's going on, depending on where you are in your journey, it may not be an instantaneous thing. It may be something, I'm not saying everything in life should just be, just get over it.
Mm,
But the point is, if you own that moment, that you own that moment and accept where you are right now. Just give yourself, I tell people to set a timer.
mm,
If you need to go have a cry, if you need to go beat the crap out of a pillow, or scream into a pillow, or or whatever you want to do, whatever you need to do, you know, set a timer, give yourself a moment, give yourself some time to go do that. And then after that, you know, leave that topic alone and go do something else, something that feels good, something
yeah,
that feels better to you.
excellent. So our challenge to you today, our listeners, is to just pause. If you're feeling you're in a tragedy, allow yourself to feel that way, and just really allow yourself, and allow yourself to go through the transitions you go through, but also hold open the possibility that something that a better is coming, right? that
Mhm.
that there is a way to laugh about this situation. you
Right.
know I even think about my mother on her deathbed.
Hold on one second. Hold on one second, please. Let me take care of that. Hello? Okay.
Oh,
Sorry about that.
okay. So go out and create an awesome story,
Mhm.
and we look forward to hearing the story that you have to share.